So I kind of single-handedly made this decision that our church was going to participate in Global Mutual Flourishing Sunday, which a number of churches are doing mostly next week around the country. And I did so because many of us as modern Christians have kind of ignored or disdained the whole area of social justice. Just the way we thought about the Christian faith, we've said that's not really important. And I now realize that in my life I've come to a place where I understand that to ignore the struggles of the powerless is a failure at the primary thing that Christ calls you to, which is love and self. So we could this morning just talk about that in a general way. Like I could stand up here and I could say, hey, we all need to care about what's happening in the world. And you could say, that sounds like a great idea, Pastor Lane, and then we would go home. We know that when it comes to ideals and virtues, they really don't mean much until we do something with them. And it seems as if lots of the struggles going on in the world have been going on for a long time, but it feels to us in the West like all of a sudden there's a lot of crisis and a lot of struggle and a lot of suffering in the world again. And one of those is the crisis in Gaza. And my heart has been moved in this last year by the cries of Palestinian people, including Palestinian people here in our own community who have friends and family in Gaza and the West Bank. We're pretty transparent here in LifeSpring, so I'm going to admit to you this morning that I'm a little nervous about this morning. But it isn't like a first rodeo of kind of bringing hard topics into the public sphere at LifeSpring. As my wife will attest, I do stupid things all the time. So I'm not nervous about calling us to care here at LifeSpring, because that is the heart of this community. I'm a little nervous because these are hotly debated questions when we talk about Israel and Palestine, and they often escalate into angry conversations and big political debates. And I'm also a little nervous because I'm not an expert. What I am is I'm a good student. And over this last year, I've been a good student, I think, of these things. I also know that a lot of you have busy lives, and so you might not know a ton of the details of what's happened at this moment in Gaza in particular. So for us to think and pray and talk about it this morning, for us to hear about it, we maybe need to learn a few things. And so we have some guests here this morning who know more about these things than I can graciously come to help us understand. But for my part, I would still like to give you just a little context before we do other things. You probably all know that last October, a Palestinian organization attacked Israel and killed some 1,200 people and took many Palestinians to the in our hearts, my heart for those people. I have watched, and from their losses, I have watched endless interviews with Israelis who lost people in that, and you can't watch those and not weep. Israel defended itself and then continued to kind of retaliate against Palestinians in Gaza. And part of this was to see the hostages returned. You probably followed some of this on the news or online. But Israel's military response feels to Palestinians like an extension of what has now been a decades-long and ever-increasing suppression of and displacement of Palestinian people. Israel's stated goal has been to destroy Hamas, but in reality, this campaign has mostly taken its largest toll on innocent civilians. Some 40,000 Palestinians have been killed in the last year. And the number may be actually much higher than that. But bear in mind that Gaza is a strip of land that's only 45 miles long and averages about 6 miles wide. So that's all those deaths in that tiny little area. And the events of last year, they come on the heels of a 16-year Israeli blockade of Gaza. And as a result of that, a lot of different things have happened because of supplies and things like fuel not being able to be brought in. But the result of that at this moment is that somewhere over 70% of Gaza's local drinking water is contaminated. And a lot of the outside water has been cut off that used to come in. And I just heard yesterday that something like 60-65% of Palestinians in Gaza are now considered food insecure, hungry. And so as soon as I said that, I know you can say, well, this is why this happened, Pastor Fred, and you can talk about all, and those could be long conversations. But here's what it does to me. I have to ask myself what I would think if I were a Palestinian living in a fenced-in enclave, not allowed to leave, And the people on the other side of that fence were making sure that my family's hungering and thirsty, if my family's still alive. And yes, you know that as soon as I say these things, the political arguments will arise, but the current political debate also has to reckon with history. And I'm not even going to give you really my opinion on history, but I want to tell you just a briefest bit of it, because I think a lot of us as Americans really don't actually know. In the 1940s, a Jewish state was created. You may know that, and was kind of interposed into the land. First by something called the British Mandate, and then after that by the new organization of the United Nations, which was just beginning. And the Jewish people were just emerging from the horror of the Holocaust and longing for a homeland of their own. And every one of us should look back on those generations of Jewish folks with tremendous compassion. The reality is, however, that the interposition of that Jewish state into Palestine was also the beginning of Palestinians losing their land, which is the story that they know and we have kind of rarely heard. So that's all I really want to say about the background of all this, because again, I'm not an expert, and I think there are lots of things you can talk about when it comes to the historical landscape. I do want to note for those of us who consider ourselves Jesus followers that Christians in the West have been less than sympathetic to this Palestinian suffering, and that it's time for us to change that. And it actually grows out of some bad theology we've been taught, which is a story I don't have time to tell this morning. But is it not Jesus himself who said to us, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for everything to be made right. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are those with good motives." That's what pure in heart means. "And blessed are the peacemakers." By the way, you might not know this. There are also Christians in Gaza, not just Muslims. And many of those Christians have also been killed in the last year. This morning, you're going to be blessed to have several things shared with you, including an interview with our Palestinian sister Lena and our Jewish brother Peter. And you're going to have the opportunity to pray for peace in this part of the world where so many people are suffering. But we're going to start all this morning by showing you a video. The first part of this video is a corporate confession recorded by some of our friends, including Carrie Lattiser, who some of you know, and who was up here with me a few weeks ago. And I think this video, I won't just tell you anything else about it, except that I think it'll put us in a good frame of mind for the rest of the morning. And the second part of this video is a montage of Israeli and Palestinian experience in the last year. And it may be a little hard to watch. I put it together. And because a large part of it is focused on the experience of Palestinians, someone will probably say that I was not being even-handed enough in the way that I put it together. And that could be true, because there is, of course, always a danger, as we talk about everything in culture, society, the world, of not being even-handed enough. But there is an equal danger of looking away from what is happening. And if we do that, we may never find our way to the compassion to which God calls us. In those Beatitudes I was just quoting, Jesus also said, "Blessed are those who mourn." And how can I mourn if I will not look enough to feel? Is there history to debate and to wrangle through with all these things? Yes. Are there tangled political and geopolitical questions involved, not only in Israel, but in that whole region? Absolutely. But what I fear we can lose track of in these things is that it is also human. And if we lose track of that, I fear that we lose the way completely. So as these guys play this video for you, I would just say, may we have open hearts this morning.
Teacher, which is the greatest commandment?
Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind."
This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself.
This October 6, we commit ourselves to peace, reconciliation, and nonviolent co-resistance to injustice.
We choose to be neighbors to all,
rejecting the trap of enemy making.
We own our agency and responsibility to join Jesus in the building of his kingdom
and the transformation of violence into flourishing.
Let us pray for the people of the Holy Land
and commit ourselves to be the allies of all those who are working to end the siege and destruction of Gaza and to return the hostages.
Let us confess the things we have done as Americans and as Christians to help perpetuate decades of injustice and harm.
Let us also confess the things we have not done,
and to repent of our silence in the face of what experts have called an unfolding genocide in Gaza.
let us acknowledge our contributions to anti-Semitism and Islamophobia,
and commit ourselves to loving all of our neighbors as ourselves.
Let us denounce and resist violence in all its forms.
and grieve with all who mourn.
Let us come together to be a people of peace,
Justice.
and nonviolence, and to build the possibility of mutual flourishing for all the people in the Holy Land.
Palestinians and Israelis.
Jews, Christians, and Muslims.
I think a part of me knew. I realized he would call me, he would contact me. אני רוצה להמשיך איתך לעולמי. For me, I know Uri was a hero because I know I married a hero. What we had on this Saturday is unacceptable.
This week, Israel attacked the Jabalia refugee camp, not once but twice. This is among the big refugee camps in the Palestinian enclave. Israel has confirmed its attack on the camp, says their targets were senior Hamas figures. But what did more than 50 people do for being bombed to death in a camp that was supposed to be safe?
I lost my whole family, all 15 of them. They were innocent, just staying. What wrong did they do? All of them were killed. My sister's house with her children, my brother's house with his children, all of my siblings. No one left except me and my younger brother.
Tens of thousands of lives violently taken. Tens of thousands of voices forever silenced. For the dead, the suffering is over. For the living, the agony of survival. 40,000 men, women, children, and babies. 40,000 sons, daughters, mothers, fathers. 40,000 people often left in pieces. For friends and family to mourn, sometimes buried by strangers, because whole families have been wiped out. Attack helicopters and airstrikes, drones, tanks, and artillery, pounding one of the most densely populated civilian areas in the world. 40,000 victims of the kind of indiscriminate bombing that might seem unimaginable in the 21st century.
In an ocean of sorrow and pain. I was broken into pieces. Few nights after losing them, I had a dream. I was sleeping at night, crying. My entire body was in pain, and through my tears, I could see everyone crying. The entire humanity was crying with me. Our tears went down on our face to our bodies. Our bodies were wounded, damaged from the war. And then our tears washed our bodies and healed it, making it whole again. And then our tears went down to the ground, and the ground was red from blood. Our tears washed the blood from the ground, purifying the ground. And then the ground was beautiful and shining. And on that ground, I could see the path to peace. I woke up shaking, and immediately I knew that this is the path I must choose. The path of not taking revenge, the path of reconciliation. And I could not ask for a better partner, for a better companion than you, Aziz.
Now, when people hear this, and I think we are much stronger together than ever alone. We've been doing so much work on campuses with anti-Jewish and anti-Muslim hate, with helping people in our own community finding ways to organize. But I think people can hear this and think, so you can lose people in your family and not be angry? And I think that's a mistake. We are angry. I am very angry. Every time I read the newspaper, I'm angry. Every time I talk to one of my friends in Gaza, I am angry. But the thing is, I do not let anger, and we do not let anger drown us in hate and wanting vengeance. Instead, I think of anger like a nuclear power. It can lead to destruction and it can make light. And my hope is that we continue to use anger as a way to bring people together, to ask ourselves, what can I do to make things better?
Marhaba, I am now in the destroyed city, Khan Yunis, but I will show you something. These are the bombs that Israel used to kill our people and destroyed our cities. But look here, it's made in USA. So again, USA participated directly in this genocide.
And in our pain and anguish, we as Palestinians, and we as Palestinian Christians actually, had to endure an additional burden: the complicity of many in the church in this genocide. The response of churches and church leaders and theologians around the world to this genocide were truly shocking to us. There was those who supported it as self-defense and justified a forceful response to October 7. And this is not the time, and I'm not going to respond to these claims and to the Zionist lines. How is it that the colonizer is defending itself from the colonized? We're tired of explaining to people that this war did not start on October 7th. People continue to ignore the context, continue to ignore that the state of Israel was literally built on the ruins of the towns and villages of the people of Gaza. People don't talk about this. And they gave the political and theological cover to this genocide. Let me repeat to you some of the things that were said. It is a just war. Some have said we are in a religious war here. Do whatever the hell you have to do to defend yourself. Level the place. Christians. Turn Gaza into a parking lot. This is a pastor. This will usher in the coming of Jesus. People are dying and they're fantasizing about the coming of Jesus. Palestinians are like the Amalekites, and you know the fate of the Amalekites. Bombs should be dropped on Gaza like Nagasaki and Hiroshima to get it over quick. These statements and many others make us wonder, what Jesus are they reading? What Bible are they reading? What Jesus are they following?
We have dignity. We have feelings. We are like everybody else. We look at our kids and our hearts, it breaks. Our heart is dead. We are dead inside. We speak, we are alive, we move, but we are dead of what we are seeing around us.
Zach, I hear you.
I ask the world government to move if they are humans, if they have any feelings, if they have any conscience, to stop this. This is not fair. This is a criminal genocide in front of everybody. Live, you're seeing this live. It's a Holocaust in front of everybody's eyes.
All right.
What do you need to stop this?
Wow, that's a really hard act to follow. I'm going to compose myself. Good morning. My name is Sue Harvey, and I'm a new face here. That's because my husband, Ken, and I have just recently started coming. Sorry, there we go, sorry. My husband, Ken, and I have just recently started attending LifeSpring. But I'm here in front of you today, and not in the audience, because God has given me a heart for justice and peace everywhere for everyone. And one of the things I've been doing, along with many other people, is going to city councils and village board meetings and asking them to pass a ceasefire resolution for the war in Gaza, stop the killing. And doing so raises public awareness. As more and more communities join together, we start putting more pressure on our state and our federal government to do and act in the cause of justice and peace in Gaza. So as part of this morning today, I am actually very excited because I have the privilege of having and leading a conversation with two special guests, Peter and Lena. Will you please come up here and join me? Hold them.
Okay.
Now, as you've kind of heard through the video, a lot of people talk about the current conflict as if it just happened on October 7th of last year. Lena, will you briefly please introduce yourself, and then can you give us a little history about this conflict? For example, when the modern state of Israel was first proposed, a phrase was used. A people without,
People without a land.
A people without a land for a land without a people. Talk to that, please.
Hi, thank you for having us here today. Thank you for inviting us into your beautiful church. My name is Lena Mackley. I'm a Palestinian-American teacher. I live in Lockport, and I teach out in Riverside at a junior high, 8th grade, English language arts. And I come from a family of teachers. I come from a family that has a principal and a teacher out in Bethlehem. And I wanted to talk about just a very brief history of the Palestinians. People have lived in what is now Palestine, the land of Palestine, for millions of years. And it was actually the Romans who coined that name, Palestina. Back in 1517, there was the Ottoman Empire, and they ruled Palestine for about 400 years. Many of the figures that I'm going to be talking about will come from the prominent Israeli historian Ilan Pappé. Feel free to look up that author, Ilan Pappé. He writes extensive history about the land in Palestine. But when he was doing his research, when the Ottomans arrived, there was about an estimated 5% Jewish population, about 10 to 15% who were Christians. But it was predominantly Muslim in a rural area, but it also had vibrant urban centers. In the mid to late 19th century, though, the Palestinians of that time thought of themselves separately from their Ottoman Turk rulers. Christians and Muslims were working to create a nationalist movement to set themselves up as a country of Palestinians, in the same way as French see themselves as French and Germans as German and so on. They wanted a nationalist identity and self-determination. However, at the same time, in Eastern Europe, founding Zionist leader Theodor Herzl established a movement to create a country only for Jewish people. At the same time, where Palestinians were thinking of themselves as a nationality, the Jews who were facing persecution and pogroms needed a homeland and decided to settle in Palestine as early as 1882 in the first wave. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, the British government sought to offer the Jewish communities a state of their own, but in Palestine. Well, this angered the indigenous Palestinians and those who have been there longer than 1882, and created a division and violence up until the Nakba in 1948 during the founding of Israel. The Nakba is Arabic for the catastrophe. Ever since the Nakba, Palestinians have been trying to establish a national identity until it was interrupted by a foreign power. After many years of conflict and resistance, there now exists Israel, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank, where my family is from. Currently, where my family resides in Bethlehem, the Israeli occupation is ever present as the city is surrounded in 3 sides by the separation wall. And the separation wall is 450 miles in length and 38 feet in height. If you want to think about it relatively, the Statesville Correctional Facility, their wall is 33 feet in height. So the separation wall in Palestine is 5 feet better than the one here. It separates Israel from the Palestinian territories and actually goes right through Bethlehem. It dead ends on a random street. Israel claims that it is there as a security measure to prevent Palestinian political violence. And I visited Bethlehem. My husband and I, we were privileged enough to go visit my family over there back in 2022, thankfully before the conflict continued to get worse. But we wanted to let you know it's a gorgeous city. It's historic. You can't even capture it in pictures. You have to see it for yourself, but it welcomes tourists every year to the Church of Nativity, where Jesus was born and actually where my parents got married. It is full of generous and helpful Palestinians who will let you taste the spices from your fingers. You'll dabble in za'atar, bread and oil, and then drink freshly made Turkish coffee that they offer just randomly out on the streets. It's a modernized city that has vibrant foods and tastes from even other cultures. You can find a really nice sushi restaurant out there, a really nice place to get a burger, ice cream and Turkish delights that shows a little connection of their past. People go to work, school, and home. They make money. They love people, and they spend time with their loved ones just like we do here. Life goes on despite Israeli occupation.
Thank you. Peter, will you please briefly introduce yourself, and then would you like to add to anything that Lena has just said?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Rivera. The past year has been profoundly painful for me as a person of conscience, as an American, and as a Jew. While violence on October 7th was horrifying to me, I was even more deeply wounded by the Israeli government's grotesquely disproportionate response. The systematic campaign has been marked by the deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure, the weaponization of starvation, and the relentless drive for ethnic cleansing, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. As a Jew, to witness Jewish people suffering, it's deeply painful to me. I've seen too much of it. But seeing Jews inflict suffering on others cuts me to the core. I acknowledge war crimes have been committed on both sides of this conflict, but only one side is doing so with my tax dollars and your tax dollars as Americans. And only one side is doing it supposedly in defense of my Jewish heritage. That's why I've chosen to speak out on this issue. Since I began my work advocating for ceasefire in Gaza, I've discovered I have a sort of a superpower as a Jew. At board meetings and public events, I've noticed the people, mostly American Christians, who ignore Palestinian speakers suddenly sit up and pay attention to what I have to say. This is a power I neither want nor deserve. I urge my American Christian friends to recognize this bias and to challenge it. The voices of Palestinians deserve to be heard. It's crucial that you engage in these difficult conversations without waiting for my blessing or consent. Your convictions should compel you to stand up for justice and peace, regardless of who is watching or approving. I encourage you to listen directly to Palestinian voices like Lena's, to seek out their stories, and to understand their struggles. Have the courage to question narratives that silence or diminish them. Thank you.
Thank you. Lena, can you please describe what daily life is like for actual Palestinians right now, whether in the West Bank or in Gaza?
Yeah, most of what I'm going to speak about is to the West Bank with my own family, uncles, cousins, aunts who live there. But Palestinians are resilient because they have to be. Israel makes life difficult for my cousins and uncles in Bethlehem to go to work in Jerusalem and back. My uncle and cousins, they work in Jerusalem as senior care workers at a senior home, and they have to pass through a checkpoint daily. You might have heard what checkpoints are. I've been through it. When I have to go and visit with my family to go into Jerusalem, we have to go into a checkpoint that is run by IDF soldiers. And Palestinians, when they want to travel between Bethlehem and Jerusalem, they have to drive as close as they can to the checkpoint in Bethlehem, get out of their cars, walk by foot through the checkpoint into Jerusalem. When they get into Jerusalem, they're not allowed to drive in Jerusalem at all. They must rely on either travel by foot, just walking to and from, or public transportation. And these checkpoints, the IDF soldiers, they carry their heavy rifles, they wear their full combat uniforms. It just threatens the daily grind of going to work and back, having to go through this checkpoint and back every single day. The checkpoint has a 7-foot tall, narrow metal turnstile. I mean, if you were bigger than this turnstile, you couldn't get through. And then even the Israeli soldiers, they'll control this turnstile. They have a mechanism to stop it just randomly. And even my uncles and my cousins have said that they've broken ribs or, broken their fingers just by trying to get through, just to go to work. So on top of just being able to go work in Jerusalem, but their conditions in which to go back and forth, it's not livable. It's not with dignity. My family lives in fear with the threat of violence from Israel daily, and that's just in the West Bank. If you want to know firsthand of what it's like in Gaza, you can look up journalists who are still alive to talk and report about the news from the ground, like Bisan Auda, who is from Gaza. She just won an Emmy for her news reporting. She's really big, especially on social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Most of what we see on the social media platforms, you won't see in your mainstream media. You can even look through the Al Jazeera news. I've noticed that the videos up here, a lot of them come from Al Jazeera, just to be more well-rounded, just to know what is going on. A lot of the images are difficult to see. If it's hard for you, take a break. But, I would hope that the messages, too, is just to go and be aware, go be well-informed, go know what our tax dollars are doing to the people in Gaza and in the West Bank. Don't forget about Palestine, and make sure you vote for those who also consider us Palestinians.
Wow, that's a lot of new information for many of us. Now, Peter, what was the perspective you were given or had of these things that she just talked about? What was your perspective as you were growing up?
Growing up, I attended a Reform synagogue. My experience mirrored that of many other American Jews. We were taught about Israel from a liberal Zionist perspective, encouraged from an early age to identify with the state, even memorizing Hatikva, the national anthem. While we weren't taught specifically to villainize Palestinians, their existence was largely ignored or whitewashed. Much like how my public school education glossed over American history and our nation's treatment of oppressed minorities. We were told that Israel's neighbors hated it solely due to anti-Semitism, neglecting to mention the systemic injustices that have made conflict inevitable. This viewpoint was reinforced by the very real threats that Jews have faced historically and continue to face today. It's vital to understand something very important here. Zionism didn't emerge from a vacuum. It arose from the harsh realities of the time and of the world. Individuals are unique, but in the end, people, groups of people, are going to behave like other groups of people in similar circumstances. I believe with all my heart that if Jews were placed in the place of Palestinians in their circumstances, that there would be a Jewish Hamas, because people are people. Likewise, any group subjected to the historical struggles of the Jewish people might turn to a destructive form of nationalism. The way out of this hell is for those of us with the power to do so, to change the material conditions that foster poisonous ideologies like ethno-nationalism, religious extremism, and authoritarianism.
Wow. I'm not going to give you a break. You have the next question. Okay. Peter, sometimes people think that if you aren't pro-Zionist, you're anti-Israel or you're anti-Semitic. Can you speak to this, please?
The key here is understanding the distinction between Judaism and Zionism. Judaism is a complex religious, ethnic, and cultural identity that has existed and adapted over thousands of years. Zionism, however, is a fundamentally political ideology that has existed in its current form only since the 19th century. And from the moment that Zionism emerged, there have always been Jewish anti-Zionism. Zionism is a form of ethno-nationalism, similar to Christian or white nationalism. It advocates for an exclusively Jewish state, arrogantly claiming territory on our shared planet for just one group. It promotes the dangerous notion that Jews cannot safely exist with others, relegating us to an isolated enclave. In this way, it's sort of a funhouse mirror version of Hitler's Jewish question, and embodies an ideology that is harmful to Jewish people, both physically and spiritually. Equating all Jewish people with this ideology is, in my view, anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, Zionists, including Jewish Zionists, attempt to conflate criticism with their political ideology with an attack on Jewish identity in order to avoid scrutiny. Unlike them, I don't claim to speak for all Jews, and we are not a monolith. There are American Jews who wholeheartedly support Israel's actions. There are others who oppose Israel's right-wing government and what's happening in Gaza, but broadly support Israel as a Jewish ethno-state. Based on polls that I've seen, about 20%, or 1 in 5, share my perspective on this issue, but I believe the tide is turning. None of us have direct control over others in this conflict, but I have the ability and the responsibility to say what I stand for. This is what I stand for. Deliberate killing of civilians is not my Judaism. Ethnic cleansing, that's not my Judaism either. Zionism, when it takes the form of an exclusive ethno-state, is not the compassionate and inclusive Judaism that I know. No one has the right to exclude others from any part of our shared planet and claim it exclusively for just one type of people.
Lena, you have the last question. What is hurting your people the most right now? And what would help your people the most right now?
What's hurting my people right now is the targeted attacks on civilians. They are being murdered by a genocidal government who's made it clear that it was never about saving the hostages. And what's going to help Palestinians the most is if we divest from Israel and side with the ICJ and the ICC to arrest and convict Netanyahu for genocidal intentions and war crimes against the Palestinians. And how do we, Americans, and here in Plainfield, play a part in doing that? There are movements like the BDS movement, the Boycott, Divest, Sanction movement, to do all of those things against any products and services that come out of Israel. We send emails, letters, messages to our senators, Tammy Duckworth and Dick Durbin, congresspeople like Bill Foster, representatives like Lauren Underwood, and we even go to the White House, reaching Biden, sending letters to Harris, sending messages to Antony Blinken, so that they know Americans are disgusted by how our tax dollars are being spent on slaughtering my people. We disrupt their functions, their conventions, their meetings, their town halls, their celebrations, their ribbon cutting, so that they don't get to live on while my people are being displaced and incrementally genocided by their government with our tax dollars and weaponry. We uplift Palestinian voices like your brave congregation is doing here today, and we never stop talking about Palestine.
Lena and Peter, on behalf of LifeSpring Church and myself, thank you so much for coming today, being here with us, and helping us understand how much there is a need for justice and peace in Gaza. So thank you. Let's, one more time. Your applause means so much. If anyone is interested in learning more, there's just a tidbit of information out, and there's a next step. And our own dear Wadia, who was the victim of a hate crime here in Plainfield a year ago, there is information about the next memorial service that's going to be held in Plainfield. It's out there. Thank you very much.
Now? Gotcha. Thank you. We're going to give all of us the chance to share in a confession of the ways we've looked away and a prayer that we might be emissaries of justice, reconciliation, and love. So I'd like to invite you all to stand with me, and if you'd like to pray this prayer aloud with me. O God, who created the world good and in whose image we are made, O God, who made us to live rightly with you and each other and your creation in justice and peace and flourishing. O God of Shalom, whose heart breaks with ours in times of oppression, war, and as ourselves. We confess that we have too often been blind to the needs of those around us. Might flourish. Help us to walk in your light, turning away hate and violence by the power of love. Help us to speak for the vulnerable, whose voices are too often silenced or ignored. God of Shalom, your life and spirit, to live as workers of reconciliation, we make all things right, and we all feast together at your table. Amen.